"She's not a spy," yelled her daughter as FBI agents took her away. They came in the dead of night, boots pounding on the old wooden porch, the flashlights slicing through the darkness like harsh accusations. Sarah Thompson stood frozen. Her breath caught in her throat as the FBI agent stormed inside without warning. "She's not a spy!" a desperate voice cried out, her daughter's voice trembling but fierce as they handcuffed the woman she called Mom. What crime could have led to this nightmare? What secrets did the government believe were hidden behind a life of quiet normalcy? In a small suburban town where everyone knew each other's names, a mother was torn away from her family, accused of betrayal no one could understand. This isn't just a story of suspicion. It's a story about fear wrapped in shadows, about the fragile line between loyalty and suspicion, and the powerful bonds that refuse to break. Tonight we unravel the truth behind the headlines, as a daughter's fight to prove her mother's innocence shakes a nation. The flashing red and blue lights outside the Thompson home cast eerie shadows across the quiet street, drawing the attention of neighbors who peered cautiously through their curtains. Standing at the forefront was Agent Daniel Hayes, a man whose calm demeanor hid a storm of conviction, one that would bend rules and rewrite truths in the name of power. Daniel's sharp suit and polished badge spoke volumes of his authority, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only the cold steel of someone used to commanding without question. His voice carried a quiet menace as he issued orders, not waiting for permission or understanding, only compliance. To the local community, he was an enforcer of justice, a protector of the nation. But to the Thompsons, and to Emily especially, Daniel Hayes was something far more frightening, a symbol of a system that wielded authority without empathy, justice without fairness. His presence turned their home into a courtroom before the trial had even begun. Daniel had arrived with a file thick with accusations, many vague, others rooted in whispers and shadows, all carefully crafted to justify his actions. His power was unchecked, his judgment absolute. He didn't see Grace Thompson as a mother or a neighbor. To him, she was a threat to be neutralized, a name on a list to be crossed off. Yet beneath the polished exterior, Daniel was also a man haunted. By his own doubts, by the blurry line between right and wrong. But fear and ambition had pushed him deeper into the role he played, where authority was a weapon and mercy was a weakness. As Emily stared into the steely gaze of Agent Hayes, she understood this was not just a battle for her mother's freedom. It was a confrontation with a man who believed his authority was beyond question, beyond reproach, beyond humanity. The morning air was thick with tension as the Thompson family gathered quietly in their modest living room. Grace sat clutching her late husband's worn photograph, her hands trembling but her spirit unyielding. The day had started like any other, but now it was on the verge of shattering everything they knew about safety, trust, and justice. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the house, loud, insistent, and unyielding. Emily's heart raced as Agent Daniel Hayes pushed open the door without waiting for an invitation. His eyes scanned the room coldly, not a hint of compassion, only suspicion. "Mrs. Thompson," Daniel said, his voice low but commanding. "We need to speak about some serious allegations. You're under investigation." Grace stood, steady despite the shock. "Investigation? For what? I haven't done anything wrong." But Daniel didn't wait for answers. Without warning, he stepped forward, ignoring Grace's raised hand. His partner, a younger agent, followed closely, moving with a harsh efficiency that left no room for doubt. They were here to take control. Emily stepped in front of her mother, her voice trembling but fierce. "You have no right. You can't just barge in like this." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Step aside, young lady. This is official business." The moment broke like a fragile glass. Daniel grabbed Grace's arm with a grip that was firm, unyielding, too forceful. Grace winced, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Emily's scream pierced the room, raw and desperate. "Stop! You're hurting her!" But the agents ignored the cries, crossing a line that had once been invisible, a line where respect and human dignity were abandoned. Grace was handcuffed, the cold metal biting into her wrists as she was led away. The family left in stunned silence, the sacred space of their home now violated. Neighbors gathered on the porch, whispering in disbelief, the scene unfolding like a nightmare none could wake from. The line had been crossed, not just between law and family, but between justice and cruelty. The video was only 17 seconds long, shaky hands, blurred focus. The scream of a young girl, "She's not a spy!" cut through the frame like glass shattering on pavement. In those few seconds, the image of Grace Thompson, a retired translator and widowed mother of two, being handcuffed by federal agents in her own living room had been captured. Not by media, not by police body cams, but by her daughter Emily, who refused to lower her phone. And when Emily pressed post, the world ignited. Within an hour, the video had climbed past 50,000 views. By the end of the day, it had become the top trending topic across Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, under the tag, "She is not a spy." Celebrities reposted it. Politicians scrambled to comment. Even military veterans, many who once worked alongside Grace, came forward, stunned and enraged, backing her honor with stories of her unwavering loyalty. This wasn't just a clip. It became a mirror. It exposed more than a single injustice. It showed a mother with a gentle face and iron dignity, dragged from her home in front of her daughter. It showed fear in the eyes of someone who had done nothing but serve quietly in the background of every major U.S. diplomatic mission for 20 years. But most of all, it showed a system cracking under the weight of its own paranoia. Emily's tear-stained follow-up video only deepened the storm. "My mom gave everything to this country," she whispered into the camera. "And now they're saying she's a traitor? Based on what? A rumor?" Her words were clipped and shared by news anchors and podcasters alike. Every angle of her voice, the grief, the disbelief, the fury, echoed in millions of living rooms across America. People began asking the one question no agent could answer. What exactly was Grace Thompson accused of? The FBI remained silent. No statements, no evidence. Just a thin press release confirming her temporary federal detainment for investigative purposes. But silence in the face of public outrage is gasoline. It burned through trust and turned doubt into fury. Protests formed, not massive, but heartfelt. Outside small-town courthouses, at federal buildings, in college auditoriums, crowds held signs, "Justice for Grace," "A patriot, not a spy," and "Who's next?" Online forums exploded with discussions about civil liberties, racial profiling, and unchecked authority. Even those who disagreed politically were united under one principle: the footage didn't lie. She was treated like a criminal without being charged in her home without a warrant in front of her daughter. And now the whole country had seen it. The whole world was watching. Emily's phone never stopped buzzing. Journalists requested interviews. Activists begged for her to speak. Even a retired CIA officer publicly tweeted, "I know Grace. She helped save lives in Cairo. If they think she's a spy, then no one is safe." This wasn't just about Grace anymore. It was about every mother wrongfully accused, every daughter who screamed and wasn't heard, every uniform used to hide injustice. And as night fell on that second day, with the video climbing past 20 million views, a chilling sense settled in. The government hadn't just made an arrest, they had awakened the nation. The courtroom was too quiet. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the faint scuff of a security guard's boot. The air was thick, not with noise, but with expectation. Everyone was waiting, not just for the case to be called, but for the moment that would define everything. And when the door at the side of the chamber opened and Grace Thompson stepped in, no one could breathe. She wore no orange jumpsuit, no chains, no shackles, just a plain navy blue blazer with a pearl pin at the collar and steady, watchful eyes. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her, and beside her stood her attorney, Calvin Brooks, a soft-spoken civil rights lawyer known for letting the truth do the shouting. Grace didn't look left or right. She walked with the same silent grace she once carried through diplomatic halls in Brussels, Kabul, and Bogota. Emily sat in the front row, tight-lipped, pale, a tissue clenched in her right hand, already damp, with nerves. She didn't cry this time, she couldn't. Her mother's dignity had passed into her veins like armor. Behind her, the gallery was filled, not just with media, but with military veterans in dress uniform, librarians who'd grown up down the street, professors who'd taught Grace's language courses, strangers holding signs that read, "We believe Grace." The judge entered. A gavel struck. The prosecutor stood, tie slightly crooked, voice thin but aggressive. "Your Honor, the defendant is suspected of unauthorized contact with foreign agents," he began, but his words were swallowed by a wave of murmurs from the back. The judge raised a hand, silencing them, but the tension couldn't be muted. Because no one, not even the Department of Justice, had yet provided a single shred of evidence. Then came the moment. The prosecution requested that Grace remain detained without bail, due to potential risk to national security. A hush fell again. Cameras zoomed. Phones clicked behind purses. Emily leaned forward, heart racing, as her mother rose to her feet slowly. She wasn't required to speak. She didn't even need to. But Grace looked directly at the judge, and then across the room, at the American flag in the corner. "I've translated peace deals in war zones," she said, voice quiet, but firm. "I've walked into rooms with nothing but my badge and my country's word, and I've never broken either." The courtroom froze. Her lawyer didn't stop her. Neither did the judge. It was as if every syllable she spoke pressed a deeper crack into the wall of doubt that surrounded her. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't weep. She didn't plead. She stood still, still as marble, still as a monument, and the silence around her said more than any argument ever could. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the threat isn't whether she's guilty, it's that we don't know what she's capable of." At that, someone in the back stood. A man in a wheelchair, decorated with a bronze star pinned to his blazer. "She's capable of saving lives," he called out. "She saved mine in Kandahar." Security tried to hush him, but it was too late. The room had turned. The public no longer saw a woman accused. They saw a woman framed. A woman sacrificed on the altar of bureaucracy and fear. The judge took a breath. She looked at Grace. Looked at the paperwork. Then slowly set her gavel down without striking it again. "Until this court has shown probable cause backed by actual evidence," she said, "I see no legal grounds to continue this detainment. Ms. Thompson, you are free to go." The room exploded, not in cheers, but in raw, stunned emotion. Emily let out a sob. Grace didn't flinch. She simply nodded once and stepped down from the podium, hand brushing her daughter's shoulder as they passed. A wave of uniformed veterans saluted her. Journalists rushed to the doors. But Grace walked out as she had walked in, silent, unshaken, and dignified, still standing, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. The courtroom had emptied, but the echoes didn't. They lingered in headlines, in breakfast table debates, in tense whispers outside government buildings. How could this happen? Wasn't just a question anymore. It was an indictment. Grace Thompson's release hadn't been a conclusion. It was a trigger, a fire alarm. And the smoke was beginning to seep through cracks that had long been painted over. What began as whispers turned into a roar. Within 48 hours, investigative journalists from 3 separate outlets released internal memos from a low-tier federal agency. Documents that showed Grace's arrest wasn't rooted in suspicion, but in convenience. She had flagged a surveillance loophole months ago. The agency buried it. And when her report leaked to Senate oversight, someone pulled a lever to silence her. The story spiraled. Talk shows filled with experts who once smiled politely now looked sick with regret. Anchors played split-screen interviews. Grace in silence on one side, redacted documents flashing like neon warnings on the other. The phrase internal betrayal became a trend. Government spokespersons dodged interviews, but the public wasn't content with shrugs anymore. Then came the leak. A single anonymous source released a 12-minute audio recording, a high-level strategy meeting. It featured laughter. One voice, calm, male, seasoned, remarked, "We don't need her to be guilty. We just need her to be gone." You could hear glasses clinking in the background. It wasn't just disturbing, it was damning. And within hours, the Department of Justice launched a formal inquiry. That's when the system began to panic. Not fix, not apologize. Panic. You could see it in the blank stares of press secretaries, in rushed memos marked urgent, in sudden unplanned retirements. Leaders who once distanced themselves from the case now offered tired statements about procedural missteps. But the country wasn't looking for polite language anymore. They were looking for accountability. Grace didn't smile at the cameras. She didn't accept interviews. She went home. And even there, protesters and supporters lined the sidewalk, with signs that read, "Justice for Grace," and "Who's really running this?" Her silence only made her stronger. And slowly, her stillness became the mirror in which the entire nation saw its reflection. Congress called an emergency hearing. The House Intelligence Committee summoned the officials who'd signed the detainment request. The same men who once claimed Grace posed a security risk now stammered beneath oath. One tried to redirect, another feigned ignorance. But a single question from Representative Clara Lewis sliced through the fog like a scalpel. If she hadn't been a black woman with clearance, would this have happened? The chamber held its breath. No answer came. Not one of them spoke. Not one dared lie. And that silence, that terrified, embarrassed silence, it confirmed what the documents only hinted at. The truth wasn't just buried. It had been entombed, protected by titles and ranks and old boy networks, afraid of what one woman standing still could unravel. The headlines sharpened. Fall of the fabricated threat. America's quietest hero speaks louder than any verdict. And, most painfully, how many more have we silenced? Lawsuits began. Congressional subpoenas followed. A bipartisan group moved to introduce the Thompson Transparency Act, a bill designed to force all national security-based arrests to undergo third-party evidence review within 72 hours. It was a step. Not enough, but something. But Grace, she stayed home. She tended her garden, sat beside Emily on the porch, spoke only when spoken to, because she had already said enough, not with words, but with integrity. Her silence wasn't passive anymore. It was thunderous. The country had listened too late, but now it couldn't stop listening. And the system that once hid behind acronyms, it was exposed, naked, ashamed, because it wasn't just a woman on trial anymore. It was the entire machine. There was no parade, no dramatic handshakes, no confetti falling from a courthouse ceiling. When the dust settled, Grace Thompson didn't walk into a hero's welcome. She simply walked into her daughter's arms. Emily clung to her like a lifeline. Not because they'd won, but because they'd survived. That was enough. That had to be enough. Outside, the world continued spinning. Cable news anchors shifted their attention. Politicians gave themselves credit they hadn't earned. New scandals rose. New headlines burned hotter. But beneath all of it, in city halls and break rooms and quiet corners of America, people still whispered her name. Not loudly, not like a chant, but like a question that still hadn't been answered. What if she hadn't stood still? Grace never gave interviews. She turned down every offer. Book deals, documentaries, paid speeches. She didn't need to explain anything. Her silence had already said more than any microphone could. And besides, she knew the truth. This country didn't want a hero. It wanted a scapegoat that refused to stay quiet, and got away with it. Emily went back to school, but she walked differently now, taller, bolder. When someone in class joked about the government, she didn't laugh. She stared, and the room fell silent. Because every student knew her mom had gone through something none of them would ever fully understand. Something that scarred, but also hardened. Like steel forged in betrayal. The town never fully recovered. Some neighbors apologized, others avoided eye contact. A few still believed the government must have had a reason, but none of that mattered, because Grace didn't need their validation. She only wanted one thing, to plant peace back into the soil that had tried to bury her. Every day she watered the garden, with quiet hands, with quiet strength. Then one morning, weeks after the hearings had ended, a letter arrived, unmarked. No return address. Inside was a single sentence handwritten on clean paper. It read, "You standing still reminded me to start moving again." There was no signature, no explanation. But Grace smiled, because somehow that one sentence carried more weight than the judge's gavel ever could. The law had cracked. New legislation was now in debate. A few officials had resigned. One faced criminal charges. But no verdict, no policy, no statement from the White House could undo what had happened. The real damage hadn't been done to Grace. It had been done to trust. And rebuilding trust takes more than press conferences. It takes generations. One by one, the cameras vanished. The reporters found new scandals. The fire died down. But the burn mark on the floor of that courtroom, it remained. A reminder that silence could speak louder than rage, that defiance didn't need fists, just feet that refused to move. And that a black woman in a federal uniform, standing motionless, could make an entire nation shift. No applause, no closing credits, just a reckoning. A slow, painful reckoning. And in the backyard of a quiet house, beneath the soft shade of an old oak tree, Grace Thompson turned the soil again. A seed dropped, water poured, and peace, the kind that doesn't beg for headlines, began to bloom, right where the system thought it buried her. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to smash that thumbs up and hit subscribe for more unforgettable, emotional, and viral true stories. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from?